Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
If you've served in the military, the Alaska VA welcomes you home and thanks you for your service. We encourage you to enroll for the VA healthcare benefits. Apply online in less than 5 minutes. You can also print, fax, or mail the 2-page form to the VA. You do not need your DD-214 to apply.
The National Weather Service.
Good evening and welcome to Alaska Weather. I'm Sam Albanese from the National Weather Service. And we'll get started by taking a look at our watches and warnings out across the state. We do have a winter storm warning for about 6 to 8 inches of snow up along the northeast Brooks Range. Basically it's above 3,000 feet, but you're going to see some blowing snow as well. Also of significance was the heavy snowfall expected basically along the Alaska Range, above 2,500 feet in elevation. Looking at the web cameras, it was already snowing at the in Denali Park there, but looking at anywhere from 8 to 14 inches of snow in that area. And again, that's above 2,500 feet, so if you're going out along the Denali Highway, McLaren Summit, you're going to be into the snow pretty good as you get up in higher elevation. Another thing going on is some windy conditions are expected over the Tanana Valley, basically this central interior region to eastern interior. Most of the wind will be ridgetop type winds, but this is expected to mix down into the downtown regions of Fairbanks with gusts to about 45 miles an hour. Some wind advisories and some flood advisories out over western Alaska, as well as some high surf in eastern Norton Sound. So some minor nuisance type stuff going on out in the western portions of the state. Taking a look at our satellite imagery, you can see what's going on. Looking at the loop over the Bering Sea, actually you won't see what's going on because not as typical, the Bering Sea is where it tends to be rather benign. High pressure over the majority of the Bering Sea, a weak low pressure system approaching Shemya, not really resulting in much of any weather there. Running that loop one more time, what you can see is what's feeding into this system and the cold frontal band that extends to the low that's up in the high Arctic that's fueling this whole situation going on essentially north of the Alaska Range. Taking a look at the GOES satellite imagery over the state of Alaska, our primary area of focus will be with this system that's north of Barrow, the front extending down, and you can see how this is pushing on across into interior Alaska. So you have your moisture filling in or flowing in, as well as cold air is coming down, lowering the freezing levels, and that's why we're looking at that snow essentially above the 2,500 foot level in there. Taking a look at that loop one more time, you can also see how the clouds moved over the south central region. They're going to continue to move east. Southeast Alaska, that frontal system, that low that was there yesterday, pushed on through and more into a showery regime down there. The surface map today, as you can see, southeast Alaska, it was raining earlier. It's pretty much changed over to showers. Some isolated showers along the North Gulf Coast. Surface ridge of high pressure, but the clouds did spread on over the region. In the Kuskokwim Valley, there was some rain being reported there. Rain on up into the upper Yukon Valley, also behind this frontal system, seeing some areas of rain, higher elevations mixed with snow. Also in the Denali Park area, and that was actually at about 3,700 foot level. It was pretty much all snow at that elevation and above. Even saw some thunderstorms, lightning strikes up in just west of Norton Sound, between St. Lawrence Island and Norton Sound. Popping up today. Some patchy fog across the Bering Sea. High pressure over the central Aleutian Islands. Basically benign conditions there, and some clouds are starting to spread into the western Aleutian Islands, but nothing in the way of winds associated with that low. Excuse me. By tonight, we'll see our one low pressure system and front is going to continue off to the east, and we have another system that's moving into the picture in the northwest Arctic coast. So along the Arctic coast, Rain and snow mixed. In Barrow, it should pretty much turn to all snow. Up along the eastern portions of the Brooks Range, higher elevations, all snow there with some accumulations expected there. Rain along this front, although at higher elevations, it's not on the map, but because I tend to focus at this, where most of the people are going to be, but above 2,500 feet along the Denali Highway in the Alaska Range, expect some moderate to heavy snowfall there. Some showers right on out across southwestern Alaska into the central portion of the Bering Sea. South of this front, we have our high pressure system that's persisting. Generally cloudy conditions, clear conditions to partly cloudy conditions along the central to eastern Aleutian Islands and the Alaska Peninsula in rather benign weather there. In the Gulf of Alaska, just a weak trough of low pressure, not a lot going on with that, a scattered shower or two. Southeast Alaska, some scattered showers, fog possible along the outer coastal areas as things clear out a little bit tonight and we see some radiational cooling. Taking a look at the forecast for Tuesday, up into the high Arctic, we have that low pressure system and trough swinging into the northwest Arctic coast. Generally onshore and zonal flow across the interior. Also expect that you can see some continuation of the snow in the Brooks Range and the eastern Brooks Range becoming mixed with rain. Mixed rain and snow up along the Arctic coast. Rain showers down across the Seward Peninsula into Norton Sound. In the interior regions of the state, rain and fog, basically the upper Yukon Valley, Tanana Valley, down into the northern portions of the Kuskokwim Valley, and at higher elevations, essentially above 2,500 feet, expect that to be snow. Some showers across the Killbuck Mountains to the Nunivak Island area, as well as some showers possible over south central Alaska and the Cop River Basin. Southeast Alaska looks like you're going to be on the dry side, mostly cloudy conditions, and not looking at any threat for precipitation on Tuesday. The Alaska Peninsula looks to remain sunny on Tuesday. Same thing for the central and eastern Aleutian Islands. Western Aleutian Islands will be in the clouds, but generally benign conditions underneath this high pressure out across the Bering Sea. Taking a look at the forecast for Wednesday, this low pressure system continues to move east. Cold air flowing in from behind this system. Snow showery type conditions, pretty much snow showers without any rain in them in the Barrow area. Further south towards the Brooks Range, a mixture of rain and snow showers, same thing with over the eastern Arctic coast. Chance of some rain showers up into the upper Yukon Valley, down into the central interior. Mostly cloudy conditions in the eastern interior. Chance of some rain showers down into the Prince William Sound area and the Kenai Peninsula, as well as down into southwestern Alaska. Then we have this low pressure system that right now there's some uncertainty about it, but it looks like it's going to be generally south of the Alaska Peninsula by Wednesday. Might be a little bit further east than where it's depicted here. So potentially seeing some rain over the Alaska Peninsula, possibly even as far east as Kodiak Island. In the Gulf of Alaska itself with this ridge of high pressure, generally not a lot going on. West-southwesterly flow, onshore flow in southeast Alaska. You may see some showers, especially in the upslope regions of the mountains in there. Across the Bering Sea, weak high pressure persists, generally benign conditions continuing over the central to western Aleutian Islands, and then our system up into the northern Bering Sea with this warm front kind of swinging on across. Cloudy conditions, good chance that you're going to see some rain over that St. Lawrence Island area. Temperatures around the state today, southeast Alaska generally in the 50s, south central Alaska generally in the 50s, although we did see some low 60-degree readings. Same thing as we move on up into the eastern interior. Temperatures are only into the mid-40s over the central interior, and as we move on up to the Arctic coast, if this thing will work, let's see if we can get this to advance. There we go. Up along the Arctic coast, temperatures were generally in the 30s, right down to the Brooks Range, 40s on the south slopes of the Brooks Range, down towards the Seward Peninsula and Norton Sound, temperatures generally in the 50s, right on down to the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta, where temperatures generally in the mid-50s there. And as we move over to southwestern Alaska, Bristol Bay, temperatures were in the upper 50s to low 60s. Same thing across the Alaska Peninsula, generally in the upper 50s. Mid-50s in the Pribilof Islands, mid-50s over the eastern Aleutian Islands at Dutch Harbor, as well as mid-50s over into the central Aleutian Islands, and only getting up to about 50 degrees today out at Shemya. For our lows tonight, expect generally mid-40s throughout the northern portion of the Panhandle to low 50s as we get to the south and just along the outer coast. Over the south central region with the cloud cover coming over, it shouldn't be as cold as it was last night, generally in the 40s to upper 30s. Not expecting any freezing conditions, at least in the Copper River Basin. Now, of course, above the 2,500 foot line, expect your temperatures to probably be right around freezing, especially along the Denali Highway. 40s into the eastern interior to mid 30s to low 30s. Then as we get on up to the Brooks Range, mid to upper 20s, low 30s throughout much of the Arctic coastal regions to mid 30s to low 40s over the Seward Peninsula. And as we move on over southwestern Alaska, a bit warmer underneath that continuous cloud cover. Upper 40s to low 50s can be expected out across those areas, including the Alaska Peninsula and the Pribilof Islands. And out across the Aleutian Islands, expect your temperatures to basically remain in the low 50s. For your highs tomorrow, expect 60-degree readings, low 60s to mid 60s in southeast Alaska. Same thing along the North Gulf Coast, basically low 60s, some mid 50-degree readings right along the coastal areas themselves. Mid 50s in the Copper River Basin to the low 50s, upper 40s over the eastern interior. Brooks Range north, expect the majority of your temperatures to remain in the 30s. You may see a few areas get into the lower 40s. 40s over the Seward Peninsula to the 50s over southwestern Alaska. 60s in Bristol Bay, low 60s across the Alaska Peninsula, mid to upper 50s in the Pribilof Islands down to the eastern Aleutian Islands, with temperatures in the mid 50s over the remainder of the Aleutian Islands. Taking a look now at our flying weather tomorrow. Marginal conditions expected from the Brooks Range north, marginal to IFR conditions across the eastern interior right on down into the Kuskokwim Valley on the north side of the Alaska Range, marginal conditions down towards Bristol Bay and the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta, with a large area of IFR conditions across the majority of the Bering Sea, basically underneath that high pressure, anticipating some pretty widespread areas of low ceilings and or fog, and some marginal conditions out across the eastern and central Aleutian Islands. That's basically, expect that to be early in the day and then again late in the evening. For our passes, expect Anaktuvik Pass to be marginal tomorrow, same thing for Adigan Pass, potentially even IFR conditions there when there's some snow falling. Lake Clark Merrill Pass, expect IFR conditions, same thing for Rainy Pass, IFR conditions expected tomorrow, and Windy Pass, IFR conditions. Isabel Pass, also expect IFR conditions. Mentasta Pass, predominantly marginal conditions, occasional IFR conditions. Tonita Pass, VFR to begin with, expected to turn to marginal conditions later in the day. Same thing for Portage Pass, expect VFR conditions predominantly throughout the day, marginal as you get later into the day. Chilkoot and White Pass, marginal conditions to begin with, and eventually you're going to see that become more VFR late in the day. For our freezing levels at the surface, basically from the Brooks Range north, sloping to about 2,000 to 4,000 feet as we get down into the south central region, to 8,000 feet along the North Gulf Coast, down to the Bristol Bay coast, to 10,000 feet over the Alaska Peninsula, 8,000 to 10,000 feet over southeast Alaska, and about 10,000 feet to 9,000 to 10,000 feet across much of the Aleutian Islands. For icing tomorrow, the main area of concern is going to be over this, basically the upper Yukon Valley down to the northern portion of the Kuskokwim Valley. Isolated moderate rime icing from your freezing level to about 12,000 feet in that area. The jet stream is looking like it's going to be about a 75 knot jet, increasing to 95 knots across the interior, then dropping off to 55 knots as it moves over Canada. The southern portion of the jet, subtropical jet, is going to be about 90 knots south of the Aleutian Islands. Very weak jet south of the Alaska Peninsula at 35 knots, 50 knots coming up over the southwestern portion of the state, and then about 80 knots over the Vancouver Island, Queen Charlotte Island region of the basically Pacific coast there of North America. 9,000 foot winds, expect about 30 to 40 knot winds over the northwest Arctic coast, and about 35 knots continuing along the Brooks Range, 35 knots across the interior, and about 20 knots as you get down to the North Gulf Coast, 25 knots in southeast Alaska, 30 knot winds across Kodiak Island, lighter winds across the Alaska Peninsula at about 25 knots, and with our high pressure out over the Bering Sea, generally pretty light winds, 15 knots or less throughout the Bering Sea. Down to the 3,000 foot level, about 20 to 30 knot winds across the Arctic coast as well as the Brooks Range, 15 knot winds coming across. So the winds and those wind advisory type conditions by tomorrow afternoon should have abated. 10 to 15 knot winds across the interior, 15 to 20 knot winds as you're coming across southwestern Alaska, the Barren Island region, Kodiak Island, to 20 knots in the Gulf of Alaska. Across southeast Alaska, the northern portion of the Panhandle, not nearly as strong, 10 to 15 knot winds there, with about 25 knots as you get down into the towards Dixon entrance. out over the Alaska Peninsula. Generally pretty light winds with that high pressure ridge dominating the region. 10 knots, 15 knots or so over much of the eastern Aleutians. The western Aleutians, very light winds, 10 knots or less, and that's also where you're likely going to see some foggy type conditions. Taking a look at our turbulence for tomorrow, expect some isolated moderate turbulence below 2,500 feet, basically across the Kamishak Gap to the Barren Island region. Also some isolated moderate turbulence just inland of the eastern Norton Sound area. And then also this western portions of the Brooks Range with the stronger winds, those cross barrier flow type winds at about 30 knots. Expect some moderate turbulence there, isolated moderate turbulence, basically below 2,500 feet as well. That wraps up this portion of the show. Thanks for watching. Enjoy this segment. Come back for the marine forecast.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Harry Keeling, and on behalf of the Alaskan Aviation Safety Foundation and Alaska Public Media, welcome to Hangar Flying. If you were able to join us the last two times, we had Anna Anderson on. Anna's a pilot biologist with U.S. Fish and Wildlife. So had some fascinating stories to tell. The first time around, she talked about her experience a little bit and talked about flying in Africa for lion surveys and that. And then last time, we talked about her current job. She's with migratory birds, with Fish and Wildlife, and what typical mission looked like there. Anna, welcome back.
Thank you.
So I want to talk a little bit about training, proficiency, and safety. You've been with Fish and Wildlife since January, and I know that you've been through some extensive training. What are your thoughts on the training that you got from Fish and Wildlife?
Training is a very important part of flying. It's if you don't constantly review and go over emergency procedures, go over even just simple things with systems and POH stuff, it's keeps you fresh, keeps going over even your aeronautical charts, what symbols mean, what airspace, what's your cloud clearances, so that most of the days you fly, it's nice weather, but what about that day when you're like, oh, do I need to get a special VFR? But if you're constantly reviewing and preparing, then it should come pretty quick. And
How long was a typical ground eval for maybe the first check ride you took?
Usually a couple hours if you're prepared and you know what you should know for the.
It's easier.
Yeah.
So, have you had a chance to go to a clinic? Did you go through the float clinic?
Yep, we had a float clinic in, I think it was May.
Talk about that program.
We get a lot of pilots that have flown for the Department of Interior, and they will go to legs and practice step turning and emergency procedures and glassy water landings and just different techniques.
And we have, obviously, you and I work together on this, but we have clinics for ski clinics, off-airport clinics, and float clinics. And generally they run 3 full days with academics and flying. I think it's some of the best training available. And I'm glad you had a chance to try it, and there's more out there for you. You talked about planning, particularly migratory bird missions, and you said week, 10 days out, you start your planning? More than that?
Yeah, about a week you're checking systems, especially weather systems in Alaska, when the next high is going to hit, or to be able to get through some of the passes. We're kind of in this bowl of mountains around us, and to get to a lot of the places we survey, we have to make it through these passes. So it's a lot of planning. I use the iPad with ForeFlight, and that helps with a lot of just getting to know the areas, frequencies, where I can get fuel. I call ahead to all the stations where I can possibly stay if I can't get past a point, and always having a second option or a second plan in case the first weather gets bad on my first plan.
One of the questions, Anna, and this is probably all the time we have because we're a little bit less than 2 minutes, but one of the questions I always ask everybody is, what one thing would you do if you could advise your fellow pilots, or you could implement, that would make flying safer in Alaska?
Alaska is a neat place because they have the Medallion Foundation, and I used it a lot. Now, especially working back with Department of Interior, we're VFR only, and I am used to flying IFR, and I just want to keep my skills current, and so I'll go in there and just shoot approaches on the sims. It's free. I mean, you can't get a better opportunity than that.
Have you tried their G1000?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's pretty neat, isn't it?
But it's really neat. And then also, I would say, don't fly below 5 miles visibility.
Good for you. Yeah.
Set
No
your
sc-
own
no scud
personal
running for you,
standards.
right?
Yeah.
Good.
Hold to 'em.
Well, Medallion is, it's something we have in Alaska nobody else has. And I certainly agree with you. They do a lot of really good things. And it's nice to know that you take advantage of it.
Yeah.
As you know, earlier, a couple of weeks ago, I did a special sessions, 3 sessions on angle of attack. And Medallion is doing a lot to push that very same thing, I think. And we're all trying to do the same thing, and that's make it safer to fly in Alaska. So thank you for being on 3
Thank you
times.
for having me.
And thank you for your dedication to flying safety.
Thanks.
Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed tonight's program, and until next time, fly safe.
Welcome back, and now we'll take a look at our marine forecast for the next couple of days. Looking at the southeast portion of the state, southeast Alaska on Tuesday, expect your winds to be out of the west, northwest, and the southern inside waters and southern outside waters around 20 knots. West winds 20 knots throughout the outside waters right on up to the east Gulf Coast. More variable winds in the central portion of the Panhandle, and then as we move on up to the Glacier Bay, Lynn Canal Glacier Bay region, expect your winds to become southerly and increasing to 25 knots throughout the day Tuesday. Taking a look at the area for Wednesday, winds are going to drop off to 15 knots in the outside waters from the east Gulf Coast right on down towards Dixon Entrance out of the west, southwest, and south. In the southern inside waters, generally expect your winds to be somewhat variable. Northwest to west winds in the southern Panhandle, central Panhandle, generally southerly type winds, and south winds 25 knots continuing up through that Lynn Canal Glacier Bay area. For the south central region on Tuesday, expect your winds to be light and variable in Prince William Sound. West winds 25 knots from Kodiak Island right across the Barren Islands across the North Gulf Coast. Southwest winds 25 knots up Chillicothe Strait, as well as 25 knot southwesterly winds in the lower portion of Cook Inlet and 15 knots in the northern portion of Cook Inlet north of the Forelands there. Taking a look at that forecast for Wednesday, light and variable winds in Prince William Sound, same thing for the northern portions of Cook Inlet. Southwest winds 15 knots in the southern portion of Cook Inlet down to the Augustine area. Southwest winds from south of Kodiak Island across the North Gulf Coast towards the Middleton Island area, with west winds at about 15 knots in that Chillicothe Strait area. For the Alaska Peninsula on Tuesday, expect variable winds around 15 knots south of the western Alaska Peninsula. West winds 20 knots south of the eastern Alaska Peninsula in the Bristol Bay region, as well as on the north side of the Alaska Peninsula itself. By Wednesday, light and variable winds in Bristol Bay, same thing for south of the peninsula, the eastern portions of the peninsula there. Winds becoming northeast 15 knots on the south side of the peninsula, and northeast winds increasing to 20 knots throughout the day on the north side of the Alaska Peninsula. For our Aleutian Islands forecast for Tuesday, expect your winds to basically be light and variable throughout the entire region. A little bit of a northeasterly component south of Unalaska and Nikolsky. Otherwise, light and variable winds right on out through the central Aleutian Islands, with light south winds in the western Aleutian Islands. Taking a look at the area for Wednesday, a continuation of that theme, light and variable winds from the western Aleutian Islands to the central Aleutian Islands. Northeast winds to north winds are going to be developing over the central Aleutian Islands to eastern Aleutian Islands, with northeasterly winds over that eastern Aleutian Islands by Dutch Harbor, and on the south side of that area that can get up as high as 20 knots there. Taking a look at the forecast for the Bering Sea coastal waters for Tuesday, Expect west winds 15 knots over the Pribilof Islands as well as the St. Matthew Island region to the Nunivak Island area. A little bit stronger south of Nunivak Island at about 20 knots. Lighter winds up in the St. Lawrence Island region at only 10 knots. Light and variable winds around the Nunivak Island waters. Basically north to northwest winds about 10 knots in the Pribilof Islands. Southwest winds 15 knots across the St. Matthew Island region, and winds becoming southeasterly at about 15 knots up in the St. Lawrence Island area. For our Arctic coastal waters, taking a look at the area for Tuesday, expect some northwesterly winds 20 knots outside of Kotzebue Sound to 30 knots as we come around the northwest Arctic coast to Barrow, and then west winds 20 knots as we move on over to the eastern Arctic coastal waters. By Wednesday, we'll see these winds increasing to 30 knots over the eastern Arctic coastal waters out of the west, 25-knot northwesterlies from Barrow down across the northwest Arctic coast to Cape Lisburne, with northwest winds at about 20 knots outside of Kotzebue Sound. For a quick recap for tonight's forecast, the big thing to remember is above 2,500 feet along the Alaska Range, the Denali Highway region, could see some pretty heavy snowfall amounts there, about 8 to 14 inches. Windy conditions are expected to spread down into the downtown Fairbanks area, gusts as high as 45 knots there. Some snowy conditions over the eastern Brooks Range, as much as 5 or 6 inches there. Over in the western interior and inland from the Seward Peninsula, we do have some flood advisories there, some moderate to heavy rainfall. You're going to see streams getting up into that bankful range, and then also some high surf in the eastern portions of Prince William Sound can be anticipated. Taking a look at the forecast again for tomorrow, things are settling down a bit. Going to see some rain continuing across the interior, showers over western Alaska, some showers over southwest Alaska, potentially into the south central region. But we're out of time for the show this evening. Thank you for watching, and have a good evening.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.